Welcome to the Learning Lounge podcast. I'm Dr. Joel Gardner, and today we'll be talking with Wendy Ung. And so I'll introduce Wendy here in just a moment. Thank you, Wendy, for being here. So often in education, we get focused on covering the content or on hitting the outcomes or reaching the standards. And the question seems to be, how can we help learners achieve the goals that are set by a school or a teacher or a government? And while this is really important, one of the main goals of education could and should be creating learners that are self-directed and contributing members of society. So today we'll be talking about some simple ways that you can create clarity in your own life, clarity on how you can move toward a fulfilling, contributing occupation in your life. And then also some ways to become self-directed in your learning and in how to achieve those goals. So again, I mentioned today our guest is Wendy Ung. Thank you so much, Wendy, for being here. Wendy is an education and international relations specialist who is passionate about helping others through international collaborations and partnerships. And she started her career as an educator. She has diverse experiences in Singapore and Japan and around the world on the Peace Boat, which is really interesting. Hopefully we can talk about that a little bit. And so she really enjoys facilitating cross-cultural exchange programs and developing experiential learning opportunities. Does a lot of writing, curates some really interesting content. So we'll leave some links to some of Wendy's online content in the description here. But thank you, Wendy. I'm excited to talk to you today.
All right, thanks for the introduction.
Yes. So when I think about the concept of being self-directed, I usually break it down into a couple of pieces. One is, okay, well, where do I want to end up? What's the goal that I have? What do I want to achieve? Or what's the impact that I want to have? And then I also have this other part, which is, well, how am I going to get there? What do I need to learn, or what experiences do I need to have? What's going to help me reach those goals? So those are some of the concepts that I kind of work with. Now, when you think about some of these concepts that we're talking about here, the idea of being self-directed, the idea of having a fulfilling or meaningful career, for example, how does a person identify the right professional career or occupation? What's the best way to do that?
I think that's a question that a lot of us have, especially during these uncertain times during COVID. Like, how do we have a fulfilling career, and what can we be doing, something that we are passionate in and we are good at? So recently I was talking to a career coach, and then she introduced this concept of kind of the career sweet spot. So the idea that, your talent and passion and the alignment to your organization overlap. So that's where you're able to find a kind of a niche where you can contribute to your organization through your talent, and it's also aligned to your passion. And of course, the Japanese, they have this kind of concept or principle called Ikigai that is quite similar to the idea of career sweet spot. The idea that, where you can find your purpose to life. And Iki is actually means life in Japanese, and Gai means like purpose or goal. So I'm currently reading a lot about Ikigai because I'm very interested in the concept, and I think it has been quite fashionable. There isn't really a direct English translation, but I think the idea is really, when you feel like there's a reason to get up every morning. And that is kind of a powerful, motivating kind of force for people to figure out, some clarity in their life or career.
Amazing. So it's like a life purpose, right? Like you said, it's not a perfect translation probably, but okay. So it's interesting because there are some, from what I'm understanding here with Ikigai and talking about these three pieces you were talking about, right? You have to talent, so you kind of have to be good at it for it to work, right? For you to be able to actually do it. Passion, you have to like it. This is what I'm hearing, at least from what I'm hearing you say here, potentially. And then it has to align with the needs, either of people, you mentioned of the organization, is that right? So that's really interesting. So for you, you have done and seem to be doing some really interesting things with your career. How did you find your Ikigai?
Well, I have not honestly found my Ikigai yet, if we're going to really go into the heart of it. But I think I'm trying, and I'm gaining more clarity along the way. So the idea is that Ikigai is not like an endpoint. You can't find it immediately. It's a journey and it's a process. And a lot of writers from the West have been looking at the concept, and there have been a lot of books published about it. So if you go online and you search for Ikigai, you can find this kind of 4-circle Venn diagram. It's not the perfect interpretation of the principle and the concept, but there are guiding questions that are quite similar to the 3 guiding questions that we had for career sweet spot. So for example, the first is are you doing something you love? What is something that you love to do? Second, what is something you are good at? Third, what is something that you can pay for or be rewarded for? And lastly, what does the world need? So I think I've been trying to use these 4 questions to kind of frame my search for my purpose and ultimately what I find fulfilling in life and career. And I mean, there are many steps I've taken along the way. And I think one way is to really talk to people. So I realized that when I speak to my mentors or my friends, so I ask them, what do you think I'm good at? And their responses are usually very helpful. And of course, writing all these points down and kind of really slowing down and thinking about, these points as you kind of go through, some of the points that you might not even have thought of until you have slowed down and kind of think about them.
Interesting. So I love that idea of it being a journey or a process. So, I can think about my own career so far. It hasn't been that long, but I spend a lot of time, many years of that time, having a specific goal and just grinding it out and pushing toward that goal and saying, once I reach that goal, I'll be doing great. But it's interesting because as you reach that goal, you kind of say, oh, wait a second, I can see another mountain peak that I can go toward or move toward that seems even more fulfilling or seems like I can make more contribution. So it is sort of this journey idea. I love that sort of metaphor with that. How do you think, you've done some interesting things. We mentioned here the Peace Boat. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the Peace Boat. You've had a lot of experiences in different countries. How do you feel like the experiences you have help shape what your Ikigai could be?
Wow. I think it's really, I started my journey as an educator. So I think I taught in a high school for 7 years. And I think I reached a stage where I was still very passionate about education, but I was wondering, what could I do next, in my life? Do I still continue to teach in school or stay in Singapore? I think that was the curiosity and the questioning that led me to join the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program when I spent 2 beautiful and wonderful years teaching in Okinawa. And I think that experience was very pivotal to my growth because I finally had time to slow down and ask myself what I wanted. And as you were saying, right, my goal for that 2 years was just to finish, teaching in my teaching experience in Okinawa and to travel around Japan. So 2 very simple goals. And I felt that I was living my life to the fullest during that time. And of course, that goal led to other goals that I pursued further in Singapore. So I think the idea of a series of different goals are very important. And of course, you should be taking every single experience as a formative one that will help you to your next goal or even the next kind of chapter. And I also had the very interesting experience to be on Peace Boat. So Peace Boat is a Japan-based international non-profit organization. So what they do is really they sail around the world as their main program to promote peace and sustainability to every part of the world. So they carry on their program on this 3-month world voyage around the world. So they will start in Japan and then they will travel around the world, visit about 20 spots, and then they will end in Japan. So I joined as a volunteer teacher, and I think that was where my goal was. I wanted to see the world, wanted to kind of take part in cultural exchange. And for that 3 months, my goal was to finish the program as a volunteer teacher to get as much as I want out of the experience. And you were talking about being self-directed. So every participant on Peace Boat, they basically could decide what they want to do for that 3 months. So you could be a typical tourist, your goal is just to see the world and see all the 7 wonders of the world UNESCO sites. But you could be, maybe an undergraduate student where you wanted to learn as much as you could before you go out to the workforce. And then I also met a lot of interesting people who were like mid-career kind of adults where they wanted to figure out what was their next step in their career. So you can see that different people have different goals, and that kind of nice floating village environment allow people to curate their own learning experience. And I thought that was very powerful.
Amazing. So it was an opportunity to get out, to learn, to reflect, to sort of regroup in a way, it sounded like, and kind of think through yourself and who you are and where you want to be. It sounds like you're still doing that, and maybe that's part of the whole point of Ikigai, is to continue the journey, right? Wow. That's very cool. Well, so what do you feel like are some of the obstacles to finding the right occupation in your life? What are some of those obstacles that you've noticed or that you see other people maybe struggling with?
Well, I think personally, because I started my career as a teacher in education, right? When I wanted to move from education to like the non-profit sector or development sector, I found obstacle in the sense that people kind of judge you based on what you have achieved in your initial years of your career, and then you feel limited by the options, and I think that is a big obstacle, and actually the most interesting jobs are when people hire you because of your diversity of experiences. So I actually went for a few interviews after my peace work experience when I returned to Singapore, after 2 years in Okinawa, and I realized that people who interviewed me and really appreciated my experiences, right? I actually end up, kind of joining them and kind of creating great things with them. But people who question like, oh, what do you do for those 2 years? Why do you leave your stable job? I think those questions are kind of restrictive, and it kind of like stop the kind of learning journey. And I think yeah. I mean,
well, that's really good. So and I'm just sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but so maybe that's a clue about the culture of that organization too, right? If they're not interested in that diverse experience, maybe it's not for somebody who is making a change in a career, for example.
Yes, and I think another thing is about, when you go on like job sites, you look for career, look for job titles. They're all quite limited, because I think what we are taught in school is, you either you are working in HR, you're working in PR, you're a doctor, you're a lawyer. So all these are very kind of, I feel that very rigid terms, but there are so many other jobs that, you can find nowadays. Other than writer, you have UX writer, other than marketer or, kind of PR agent, you have like digital marketer and digital, kind of. So I thought all these job titles or these possibilities should be shared with students in school. I mean, I wish that I knew more about, what are the possible sectors and roles out there.
That is interesting. And, we live in an environment now. It's a global economy. There is tons of competition. There are a lot of pressures that we're facing. And so change is just constant. Knowledge society, constant new change. So, and you keep hearing things like, oh, yes, people will have 5 different careers in their life, or they'll work for 8 different companies in their whole life, So the idea of putting someone on a track that they're going to stay on for their whole life, I'm going to be a doctor for 50 years, that doesn't really necessarily fit our environment anymore. It doesn't fit the way the world is set up now. So I think that rings true with me too. So how can other obstacles, other things that tend to get in the way of finding your Ikigai? Anything you're thinking of?
Well, I think one thing is money. All right. I mean, like a lot of us, maybe, for us, especially in Asian society, right? You think about a job, a career is really for you to earn money to support your lifestyle. And I think the interesting thing about Ikigai is that, you don't need, your Ikigai is not dependent on, your career. You could find your Ikigai in other ways, it could be through, your hobby like gardening, it could be through your family relationship. And it's interesting. So one of the very good book to read about Ikigai is called The Little Book of Ikigai, The Essential Japanese Way to Finding Your Purpose in Life by Ken Mogi. And then he said something about this, like it doesn't matter whether you're a cleaner of a famous bullet train, the mother of a newborn child, or a Michelin-starred sushi chef. You can find pleasure and satisfaction in whatever you do. And if you do that, then you have found your Ikigai. And I think, if we keep thinking that we want to find that perfect job, want to land in that perfect career path, then it might be an obstacle to really looking for your Ikigai, because there are so many other ways to look for it.
Very good. I love that. So in some of so it's more how you're using your time and not necessarily how you're earning money. It could be how you're earning money, right? But it's not necessarily. I like that. Very good. We have to make money. That's how our society is set up right now. You have to be able to provide for your needs and for your life, right? But then Ikigai can come from other sources. I love that. So one thing that is really interesting here. So we talked about this idea of Ikigai, your purpose, life purpose. But the other part of it is the learning part of it. And so we have schools, and we have formal universities and other certifications and so forth that you can take part in that are formal learning opportunities. But you've talked about and written about self-directed learning. So this is a really important concept, particularly when you're working toward or when you're working to fulfill your Ikigai. So we are in the knowledge society. We talked about this. The technology and information and competition are always changing. We have to keep learning. So what are some strategies that you are recommending for this self-directed learning? How can a person become a self-directed learner?
All right. So I think firstly is you really need to embrace a growth mindset. To kind of be curious and always wanting to learn, even after leaving kind of tertiary education or higher education. So somebody with a fixed mindset, compared to a growth mindset, is somebody who say, oh, I'm not good at public speaking, so I should avoid it. I think that is something that we all should avoid. Not saying that if I'm bad at something, I don't do something. So the idea that you keep on growing, and especially with the onset of COVID, and with all what is happening, we are seeing digital transformation, education transformation. So there are skills that you should continuously pick up, even if you think that you might not be good at them. But the idea that you should have be kind of have broad competencies, I think that is very important, and continue to grow. So for example, during COVID, we are all kind of stuck at home. So I really took the opportunity to kind of build skills that I really want to learn, but I don't have the time, and when we are stuck at home, there are so many online courses, you have Coursera, you have LinkedIn modules. So one of my side hustle is travel writing. So I actually took the time to learn SEO foundations. So I think it's something that's important, if you can identify what are some of the skills you want to learn, not just for your job, but for some of your hobbies or side hustles outside, you can continue to grow. And I think another strategy is to kind of keep talking to people, as I mentioned just now. So one way to identify, more of the learning paths or even career options is to really talk to people. It could be your friends, your mentor, your supervisors, your colleagues, or it could be your friend's friend. And one strategy that I found really useful is that I actually approach friends on people on LinkedIn to ask for what I call informational interviews. So where I just ask them, oh, could I have 15 minutes of your time to ask you about your career journey so far, what you're doing in your current organization, and what could you advise for somebody like me with my skills to enter your industry. And you will be surprised, in the month of April and May this year, I had so many people who responded to me positively, and some of them even spent up to an hour talking to me, just sharing their life and career journey. So I think there is a wealth of information out there if you're willing to ask, and of course ask the right questions. And I think that there's so much you can get out of it, and that will really help with your self-directed journey. Because a lot of people that I spoke to, they actually recommended resources, reading lists, courses that I could take to improve.
Wow, that is a powerful tool for self-directed learning. So, often when you think about self-directed learning, you might imagine yourself reading a book or you're taking a course, and those are powerful. You mentioned those things, right? But if you go to someone who's already done what you'd like to do or who is doing what you want to do and ask them, how did you get there? How could I get there? You're going to get the shortcuts, the direct path. If you're talking about Ikigai being a journey, well, you can kind of wander around until you find the way, or you can just ask somebody who's already been there. Hey, how did you get there? Okay, I'm going that way, right? I love it. That's a great strategy. And I think that's something that a lot of people just overlook. So wonderful, wonderful idea. You talked for a minute also about breadth of knowledge. At least in my experience, and my understanding as a scholar in higher education is that often a university is set up to focus on a pretty narrow area or discipline. You know, you have the College of Business, and I'm doing a business administration program, or no, I'm in web development. And so there are these really narrow sort of focused areas of knowledge, which is good because you're gaining really great skills for that particular area. But you were talking about breadth of knowledge. And so what are your thoughts on the pros and cons of having this really focused knowledge versus more breadth or general skills that people can have?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I've been actually thinking about it quite a bit. Like, as I go on my professional journey, do I want to be a specialist or generalist? And I think there are merits in both. You just have to be very clear what you want to get out of it, whether you are a specialist or generalist. So, for example, like of course, you're talking about more specialized jobs, specialized skills will be needed. But at the same time, I think we also need to understand that there are a lot of skills that we learn on the job, and it's actually not so bad to being kind of a jack of all trades, kind of having general skills. And I think that's why there is increasing popularity of liberal arts colleges, because you really train the thinking skills and the kind of critical learning skills rather than specializing in something very early on in your studies. And it's also interesting. So my college is National University of Singapore. And a few days ago, they just announced that they want to do a College of Arts and Science. So they basically want to combine the Faculty of Science with the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. And I see that as a step forward because you really encourage what we call cross-learning and multidisciplinary learning. And so for my own journey, right, actually when I was in university, my first year of university, right, I was in the Faculty of Science. So my major was applied mathematics because I wanted to be a math teacher. But after the first year, I was seduced by the wonders of the arts modules. So I actually changed my major after 1 year. And I went on to pursue a major in the arts and social science faculty in English literature. And I was just wondering if during my time I was in the liberal arts college, I mean, I probably didn't have to change major. I could pursue whatever I wanted. And I could be an excellent math and English teacher. So I feel that there are merits, and I think increasingly with all the flux that we are seeing, the society, it might be useful to have really different set of skills rather than just being focusing on maybe one area.
Right. That is so powerful. Years ago, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book about experts, and he said, okay, the people who are the real experts in a given field, like a musical instrument or in hockey or something like that, he gave all these examples. They usually have around 10,000 hours of practice at that one skill. So here he's talking, though, about a couple of things. A specialist, right, one area of expertise. And not only that, but these are skills that are often repeatable skills. Like, if it's hockey, you're hitting it's a specific context where you're playing the same way. So another author, let me find, I think I have the book here. Oh, David Epstein wrote this book called Range, Why Generalists Triumph. Why generalists triumph in a specialized world. And so he gives, dozens and dozens of examples of people who maybe had expertise in an area, but it was their breadth of knowledge, bringing in information from all these other sources that allowed them to solve major problems and come to and have some innovations that were just really saved people's lives or helped move science forward in a powerful way. So I think I tend to agree with what you're saying. It's good to have some specialization, but there is a balance here between specialized and general knowledge, integrating those two together. It's really powerful. So if someone was here right now listening to the podcast, which, by the way, this has been really interesting, really good ideas here. What could someone do right now to chart a path to a more fulfilling or a more meaningful occupation? Not necessarily a career, but occupation. How to use their time, how to move toward their Ikigai. What should they do?
Well, I think the first step is to really pause, slow down, and think and reflect. And that was something that I think I'm struggling with to do because with our day-to-day hectic life. But because of COVID, I couldn't go out of my house for a few months, right? So that was something that I did. I think and to really think about and reflect about the guiding questions we're talking about. So you can use any framework you want. You can use Ikigai, you can use career clarity, you can use purpose of life. But I think it's really going through the questions like what are you good at? What would you like to do? I like this question. What makes you light up when you talk about it, and you can talk about it for a long time. What activities that you do make you lose track of time. I think those are important. And if you are financially secured, what will you be spending your time on? That will really help to unearth certain maybe secret passions or things that you're holding back because of certain constraints you have. And I think secondly is to really have open conversations with friends, as I was saying just now, potential mentors or people in your industries or outside industries. It's like, what you say is like a shortcut, kind of gaining people's life experiences and seeing how that will go. And I think thirdly, I really enjoy the idea of reading. Now that we can't travel, reading kind of is a substitute for that, So one of my friends actually recommended for me to subscribe to reading lists. And I find that very useful. It could be just Google alerts. If you're interested in, education, in technology, there are so many interesting writings out there. Or even subscribing to organizations and newsletters that you're interested in. So for example, I find very interesting articles in McKinsey Economist website. They send their reports to you every weekly or monthly that you're looking for. And I think, maybe the last point is to also think about what can you do outside your full-time job. What are your hobbies? As I said, it could be a paid hustle. Let's say you're very good at talking to people, can you be doing sales, on the side, or could you be doing some writing? Or could you be volunteering? They call it like a side helpful. Rather than earning money from it, could you be, volunteering from some organizations where you can meet people, exchange ideas, and find out more about what you could do outside, what your full-time job.
Very good. Wow, some really powerful advice there. So it sounds like you're saying, slow down and just think. Talk to people. Try to reflect. Where should I be headed, or where do I find my Ikigai? And then learn. Just read and talk to people and understand, and then also consider what lights you up. That was a really good way to phrase it, right? What lights me up? What makes me excited? What gets my energy moving? Really powerful.
Yeah, and so what will get you in the flow? So in one of the Ikigai books, it's about, when you're in your flow, you realize that you could lose your time just working on a task. And that is so powerful, right? And so what is something that, you're always in your flow when you're doing? If it's your job, that's great. But if it's not your job, then what else? Then should you be pivoting to something else?
Good. Very wonderful. Well, any last thoughts or advice or ideas related to the idea of Ikigai or self-directed learning?
I think as you, I guess just to recap that, the idea of slowing down, I think that's very important, and finding your true passion. Previously we're talking about how, imagine if, let's say, you started your childhood in schools in the beginning, where your teacher already kind of encouraged you to find your purpose in life. So you can imagine how powerful that will be, rather than waiting when you're in your adulthood and you're wondering, what am I doing with my life after 30 years into your life journey. So I actually tried an experiment with my 9-year-old niece a few weeks ago, because I came across some website talking about, teaching children the concept of Ikigai. So I gave her the Venn diagram. So I asked her some guiding questions like, so I asked her, what do you love to do? So she was like, oh, I love to swim. I love to draw. I love to sing. So I asked her then, what are you good at? Oh, I'm good at singing. I'm good at acting. I'm good at swimming. I'm good at sleeping. And then I asked her then, what can you do that, you can get paid for, or people will pay you for, or people reward you for? And she's like, oh, I could be good at making things, designing houses. So I realized that all these questions are so powerful, because you realize that, what are her interests. And imagine if we cultivate her interests for the next few years, and she will be, how fulfilled she will be during her learning process, and how self-directed. And the last question is, what does the world need? And she said, oh, the world needs people to care, to stop polluting, to provide more clean water. And that's from a 9-year-old girl.
Wow.
So imagine the potential. And I feel that if we could, kind of guide our children with these questions, either formally or informally, right? I think it will be something that really can ignite certain talents and passion that really help to make the world a better place.
Amazing. Well, Wendy, I have really enjoyed talking with you today. Thank you so much for your ideas about Ikigai, self-directed learning. So what we'll do is we'll take some of the books and the resources you've mentioned. We'll post those in the description to the podcast. And thanks again so much for taking the time all the way from Singapore to spend time with us and share your insights and ideas. It's been really powerful, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It really made me think more about my Ikigai too. Hope we can all find it one day.
Yes. All right. Thanks, Wendy.